Hi everyone, welcome out to our webinar today, 8 Secrets for Successful Sales Management. I'm your host today, my name is Kristen Trone, and while we wait for a few more people to get on the line, we'll start with a little video clip.
Customers of InsideSales.com know how to sell. They're the best sales teams in the world, and they operate like high-performance machines running on rails. The key to their success? Business process. Once a month, these top executives get together for 3 days to share their business processes, best practices, and strategies. This exclusive gathering is called Speed Camp. Speed Camp is facilitated by experts from InsideSales.com's Momentum team. At Speed Camp, executives first work together to solve an opening case challenge. Then, they get coached on InsideSales.com best practices, practices that developed from decades of research. Finally, coaches and executives roll up their sleeves and work together on individualized success plans. Speed Camp is hosted at Sundance, Utah. For 3 days, InsideSales.com takes care of everything. 5-star accommodations, black car service, and the beautiful Wasatch Mountains provide the perfect setting for 100% focus on improving sales results.
I thought it was really cool to be able to talk to other people who manage and deal with inside sales organizations and hear different perspectives.
I thought the case study was awesome.
The benchmarking exercise showing where we rank with others in the industry.
I can't say anything but positive things about the Momentum team.
InsideSales.com customers know how to sell. Speed Camp gets them to the next level.
Kind of a fun video, high energy. So Speed Camp is something that my team does. My name is Kristen Trone again. I'm a senior strategist on the Momentum strategy team. So we do training for sales executives, training and accompaniment with our platform to help people be more successful and really see the business impact. So we're really excited today to have David Matson on the phone. He'll be presenting to us in just a few minutes, and he is the president and CEO of Sandler Training. You've probably all heard of Sandler Training, and we're excited to hear more about that today. We're really excited that David is joining us. Thanks for everyone that is joining us live today. We are broadcasting live, and we'll hear from David in just a few minutes. But before that, let's get started with just a few pieces of housekeeping. So how the webinar will work, it will last for about an hour. You can type your questions also along the way. If you have questions about what we're talking about or questions about our company specifically or what have you, you can go ahead and type those in the question and answer box on the bottom of your web client. And we'd also love it if you'd promote the webinar via social media using the hashtag ISDCwebinar. ISDC is InsideSales.com. Also, this is being recorded, so at the end I'll give you some information on how to access that recording. But go ahead and feel free to contribute as you'd like to with those question and answers. So starting with myself, my name's Kristen Trone, as I said. I'm a strategist on the Momentum strategy team here at InsideSales.com. So I want to present myself, and then David will introduce himself just with a few questions. So I'll start with a fun fact about myself. I really enjoy science in the kitchen. I would like to say that I'm kind of like America's test kitchen. I like to test out several recipes when I'm looking for a new recipe and sort of create my own. My role at my company, as I said, is I'm a strategist, but I'm on the strategy team here, which we call Momentum. Our team helps really drive the value of our platform as we sort of drive business impact. And we do that through data analysis and business process design as we sort of interview reps and figure out where we can really see lift. Where I've gained my experience, really, I would say, is on the floor with reps. As a strategist, I spend a lot of time with reps doing seat rides, seeing really where their pain points are and where their strong points are in their sales process. And what makes me an expert? Well, along with being on the floor a lot with reps and really seeing how sales works, I would actually say that my background in science gives me a good analytical perspective, which really helps me solve the problems that we see, even in the sales process. These skills are really have been able to translate well. I studied biophysics at Stanford University, and I worked in a research lab there for 2 years at the medical center. And last of all, where can people find my content? Well, I'll be published on the Sales Insider blog. Just recently I published an article there, and that's insidesales.com/insider. And I'm also a published scientist in the Journal of Biochemistry. So that's a little bit about me. Let's move on to David. David, can you go ahead and give us a little presentation of yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Kristen. A little bit about myself. So I'm the CEO of Sandler Training. I have actually started as a client in 1985 and then started working for a Sandler trainer. And I thought to myself, I didn't realize as I first showed up that salespeople were made. I always thought they were born. And I thought I was one of those groups of people that just weren't born into the right pool. So once I realized, sitting in a Sandler class, hey, I could learn this stuff, I started working for the local Sandler trainer. And then in 1988, I came down to work for Dave Sandler, who founded our company. And that was an awesome experience. I knew going into it that he was the guru, so I really took the opportunity to suck up as much knowledge as I could. And I had a 6-year relationship with David before he passed away. Personally, where have I gained my experience? Well, I was a client. Certainly, I had owned a business prior to Sandler. And like you, Kristen, I had the ability to live with our team, and equally as important as our clients. So I was in the field doing workshops, doing seminars, being a consultant, getting the opportunity to walk through dozens and dozens of different clients' hallways, sitting in their board meetings, and really getting an understanding of how business works both domestically and internationally. So it was really a great experience. You can find all our content, certainly in all the social media channels, but Sandler.com. You can find our content. We've written quite a few books that are all bestsellers, so anything that has to do with sales or sales management. Quick little fun fact for me, I have a list of things that I'm afraid of. And so I just went to do the bungee jumping, and I did the skydiving. That was on my list. So I've got now shark. I'm going to do some shark diving. I'm afraid of that as well. So I'll try to cross that off the list as I move forward. And I'm an introvert. So for somebody that speaks in front of thousands of people a year, I'm introverted by nature. And when I say that in front of the audience, if you take my personality profile, I'll always come back as the person who is sitting in the side of the party watching others and observing, but not necessarily air traffic controlling all of those conversations. That's a little bit about me. Today, as Kristen said, my goal is to give you some secrets to successful sales management. And we've got thousands of people with us here today. So I know we have different roles in different size companies. But in general, I think sales management is a tough job. And I think it's probably the toughest job in any organization. Because if you think about what we do, we have to make sure that our teams are self-sufficient and are as productive as possible, if you think about that for a second. Because as a sales manager, I've got a lot of different initiatives that I'm juggling. I'm juggling all the stuff that comes from upper management. I've got to deal with the customer issues. And then I also have to make sure that my team is productive. And that's really what we're supposed to be doing. That's how we're judged. And we all know that if your team is like any other team, you've got people that are stuck in what I call comfort zones. And a comfort zone in my world is somebody that is probably working in my world at maybe 50, 60% of capacity. I know they could do better, and maybe they did better in the past, but they've hit some level. Maybe they're economically comfortable and I'm making enough money so I don't really want to kill myself. Or I just don't know what to do. There's a lot of reasons for comfort zones, but I think we've all experienced them. So we've got to figure out, how do I make my team productive, knowing that I've got a group of my team members, and we all have the 20-60-20 rule where I've got my top 20% that I want to leave alone, and hopefully I can clone the rest of my organization to look like them. I've got my 60% that if I could just, as a sales manager, increase their productivity by 10, 15%, I would blow through my quota, blow through my numbers, and that's great. And of course, I've got my other 20% which are either completely new to the organization and or probably shouldn't be in my organization. So we all have that. And as we try to make our people as productive as possible, I think the ultimate goal for a sales manager is to create an atmosphere of self-sufficiency. I want salespeople to be confident and have confidence and conviction when they're in front of our customers and our prospects. And how do I create that? And it sounds so intuitive yet, but when I talk to sales managers and I observe them, and I've been on many sales meetings and calls, they actually create an atmosphere of learned helplessness. And the salespeople are afraid to take the next action in that sales process without permission or to ask for, hey, what do I do next? And in the beginning, that may have been called training. I mean, I don't think so, but it could have been called training. And maybe as a sales manager, you want to make sure that they're making the right moves, but somehow that just never disappears. So this learned helplessness thing kicks in. So what I want to do today is to share some best practices with you that we've captured from around the world. And so I'll give you a brief introduction about who we are and where are these best practices coming from. So Sandler's been around for many years, almost 50 years now, and we have won tons of awards. I mean, we've got the top training company from Training Magazine. We've got the top sales training company from Personal Selling Power, certainly top management company from Entrepreneur. So those are all great. The ones that I love, though, are the highest return on investment. So regardless if you do it on your own or if you go outside to somebody else, Sandler always ends up with the highest ROI in three big categories. One is for individual producers. So for an individual producer, we always rank the highest. For team quota, we rank the highest. And then for customer renewal, we rank the highest. So, we've got 265 training centers in 31 different countries. And we've got, I have to say, by far the best trainers in the world because all of our trainers came from the sales world and came from the management world. So when you ask them, hey, let me see you do that, they will automatically kick into role play. I mean, I'm honored to lead that organization. They are rock stars. So let me kind of walk through some of the best practices, and I'm going to couch this as a health check if I can. So let's talk about each and every one of them. You take what I'm going to share with you, and hopefully these are actionable things that you can take back and into your organization. But I'd also like you to go back and say, okay, where do I stack up? Do we actually do some of the things that the Sandlers just talked about? First one is to create a sales template. So you've got to create a sales template. When I do executive coaching, the topic that always comes up is I'm trying to create a sales culture. I want to make sure that my team has a common process, a common language. And I firmly believe, and Sandler firmly believes, that you do need a common sales language as an organization. So as a sales manager, you have to ask yourself, is that happening? And so if you think about why do I need a common language? If I manage, I don't care if it's 20 people or 200 people, is that really important to have a common language within my team? I think it is, because if you zoom back for a second, you have to say, okay, well, are salespeople made or are they born? And if we were in a program together, I'd have 50% of their hands raising in one way or the other. But for the most part, I think that they're made. That doesn't mean that we don't have skills. Like I'm introverted. Can I sell? Of course I can sell. It may take me some more energy, but I can sell. So automatically, you can shape me, you can make me. I don't think my parents drove me to sporting events, or they drove me to all the extracurricular activities so I could grow up to be a salesperson. I don't think that's what they had planned. My parents expected me to be a teacher or an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor. I don't think we sat around the kitchen table saying, David, when you graduate from the university, boy, you're going to be an awesome salesperson. That didn't happen. So they are made. When we were in the hospital, my parents didn't say, hey, is David healthy? Yes, he is. And by the way, he's going to be the first salesperson in your family. Not what happened. So we are made. It's going to take some more energy than others. And so that's a big premise. So if we are made, we do need the language. And language in other parts of the organizations are there anyways, if you think about it. Your accountants can talk to my accountants. They have the same language. They all know what those terms are. Your marketing group can talk to my marketing group. We all know what SCA is. We all know what the conversion ratios are. So it's there. It just seems to be in sales, that we don't have a common language. And I think that's important. Now, let's talk a little bit about how to get that, or do we have it? So here's the health check. Can you sit your team in a room or on the phone, depending on where they're located, and ask them to write down from the time that they're prospecting to the time that they're selling additional products and services to your customer, write down the process that they follow. That's your first big aha moment. Because sales managers would say, of course, all my salespeople will have the exact same thing on their pieces of paper. Because if you were to say to them, draw 6 or 7 boxes and just tell me your process, start to finish, how many people on your team would be the same? Now, I've done this tens of thousands of times. I would tell you the majority of people on the phone, your team would not have something that looked even remotely close to each other. So if that's true, if you can believe it for a second, it's got to be so hard as a sales manager to manage people who are attacking the sales process completely differently. So how do I do that? Well, it's really difficult. So let me give you some things that you may want to do. If you believe that creating a sales process and a sales language is important to your organization and you're not sure whether they have it, your first step is do it at a sales meeting. Just ask everybody to pull out a blank piece of paper, draw 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 boxes on there, and just say, start to finish, what's the process? That's your first. And once you get past that, and if you haven't, if it comes up and it's not congruent, then create a brainstorming session and say, what do we do step 1? Okay, what do we do step 2? You're going to find it's not that hard to create a common methodology. Now, of course, I love Sandler, but you can use any process. I mean, I think for the majority of our large institutional clients, they already have a 6, 7, 8 step process. They use Sandler to make it more effective. So I'm not asking you to convert to the Sandler selling system, but certainly, you need one on your own. And here's step 2. After you've got the 6, 7 steps, whatever it is for you, then under each one of those macro boxes, so for example, you may have qualification as one of your steps. What are the 2 or 3 things that you need to do under qualification before you think it's a good idea to move to the next box in your sales process? So your first move is, what is my sales process? Your second move is, what are the 2 or 3 things that I need under each step in order for me to move forward? Because salespeople, they move too quick through the sales process. You have stuff in your sales funnel that shouldn't be there or lives there for too long. So you need to figure out, in my world under qualification, I need pain, money, and decision. If I don't have 3 to 5 pains and I don't have the impacts and I don't have the financial ramifications, then I know that prospect or customer is not necessarily qualified. And so I wouldn't jump, let's say, to presentation. So once you have that, now it's easy. So when I go to highly productive companies, I can walk down the hallway with a sales manager, and they can stop anyone and say, what's our sales process? And they can rattle it off, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. And what are the 2 or 3 things that I need to do before we move from stage 1 to stage 2? And those salespeople know it, and they are growing at phenomenal rates. And some people have taken a shortcut. They'll say, well, I'm going to hire a veteran. I'll hire somebody that's got the industry experience for 20 years. And that's good. That helps. But the fact of the matter is that doesn't necessarily mirror what you're doing at your company. I've been with, let's say, financial institutions, and they've hired veterans from a different industry, and they had a $100 million portfolio, and they came to this particular bank, and they said, well, my gosh, the person failed. Why is that? Well, because they were actually farming over in their other business, and you're asking them to hunt over here, and that process is completely different, and it's really hard. So I think you do need that methodology, because as a sales manager, you need to coach and train to the methodology. And so if I had, let's just say, 7 steps in your process, and you know that your top producers, there should be a 30% conversion from step 2 to step 3. But yet the person that you're in front of coaching, this individual sales rep, only has a 6% conversion rate, then there's something wrong. Because now the process allows you to be a scientist. The process allows you to say, where's my high water mark? What's my benchmark for success? It also allows you to say, where are my individual contributors, my salespeople, need help? Because then you can take an individual against your high water mark and say, where can I help them? And that's really important. There's a good test to see if you've got a common methodology. Most organizations are frustrated by the fact that they're not utilizing the CRM as much as they should. And I'm a huge fan of CRM. And we train most of the CRM organizations. But when your company's not utilizing the CRM and you hear things like, from your salespeople, hey, I'd love to do the CRM, but, you have to pick. Do you want me to talk to more customers and prospects, or do you want me to fill out the CRM stuff? You choose, boss. And you've all heard variations of that. Well, in essence, that's symptomatic to chances are the CRM doesn't match the sales process that's either followed by the individual or your organization. So I always like to make sure that you've tailored that CRM to match the sales process. Most organizations buy a CRM product thinking it is sales process, and it's not. So you can create one. You can do it in less than 2 to 3 sales meetings. Again, macro first, and then go under each one of those 4 or 5 steps and say, what are the 2 or 3 things that I need to accomplish before it's a good idea to progress, to move to the next step. See, salespeople, we tend to suffer, and I am one of them, from premature presentation syndrome. If my prospect tells me that they're qualified and they want it, I tend to believe them. And I forget, and I move too fast through the process because I don't have a process. And there is a rule in sales. You either have a process or by default, you are going to follow your prospect's process. And I'd like to lead the dance, as they say. I want to be able to say to my prospect, here's the process. And that's an easy thing, and I think if you have one for yourself, you'll find it there as well. So let me just do a quick poll, if I could. How many of us have a common language or sales process across your team? Now, when you're answering this poll, think about if you sat your team in a room and everyone had a blank piece of paper and you asked them to write down, 5 to 10 boxes, how many of them would actually have the same process written down? And then I'll ask the advanced question, which is how many of us would have the same 2 or 3 things underneath? So take a couple seconds, just say, yes, I've got one, or no, I don't, and then we'll kind of move on to the next step. Let's see what we have. So most salespeople say, or sales managers will say, yeah, I don't have a process. And that's great. And I think that's being honest. And I think the good news is within 30 to 60 days, you could create one on your own. And I would sit maybe with your top producers and just say, okay, what do you do start to finish? And you could take best practices and create one. For those that say they do, and there's a lot of us that say they do, which is I congratulate you. So for those 42%, I would just here's the reality check. When you leave this call, walk down the hallway and ask your salesperson, the first one that you see, tell me our sales process. Because I know when I'm in an organization and a manager says to me, of course we have sales process. And they actually go into their desk and they pull it out. The problem is no one else actually follows it or knows it. And I have said many a time, I will bet you my fee for training. I'll bet you my fee. We'll sit 10 of your salespeople in the room that they will not have a consistent process written down. If they do, I'm going to come in and do my stuff over the next couple of years for free. If they don't, then it's over. And guess what? I haven't done it for free yet. So I applaud you if you have a process. Just do a reality check and go and check it out and see if you do. All right, let's do another best practice that awesome sales managers and organizations have to make sure that their people are self-sufficient is a playbook. So create a playbook. Now, I know in our organization, every person that comes into our company gets a playbook. I don't care if you're a salesperson or a manager. And why is a playbook important for a second? Well, have you ever run into the situation where tribal knowledge walked out the door. Somebody who's been in a particular position for 10, 15 years or was just an absolute rock star, they had all the answers. They left the company. And when they left the company, so did all those rock star answers. And they were at a 10, and we were at a 6, and we were still there at a 6 because the 10 left. So tribal knowledge is there. Also, if you're managing more than one person, people are great at different things. I've got people in our organization that are just awesome at handling objections. Others are great at the phone. Others are just fantastic at dealing with competitive situations. So I'd like to take the best of the best and create a playbook so everybody can be as good as they can be. See, what drives me insane is this mentality that you have to be there for 20 years, 30 years in order for you to learn by the road of hard knocks. I think that's ridiculous. I think if you can tell me what your top producers do, then as a single salesperson, it's really my responsibility to go and mimic it, to go and just reflect back to my prospect what the response to the objection is that's being used across the country that has great results. Why would I learn by just kind of messing up? Who needs that? And if you think about playbooks for a second, hey, there's a lot of other organizations that have playbooks, right? If you think about whether it's sports, there's a ton of sports. We all have playbooks for sports. If you're paid tens of millions of dollars as a professional athlete and you go to a different company or a different team, they don't say, hey, listen, I'm the top of my game. I don't need to know what you're running here in these plays over at XYZ team. I'll do my own stuff. That's not how it works. But if you have a common methodology, which we talked about in a second, you also could have a playbook. And the playbook just gives them all the great stuff. So what could be in a playbook? Well, here's what's in our playbooks. And I'll give you some topics. So how do you do a 30-second commercial? What is your 30-second commercial? And a playbook would have the best 30-second commercial, the best phone call. Here's how you leverage LinkedIn. Here's your LinkedIn referral script. Here's the top 10 objections that we hear and the responses to them. Here's your first call. Here's how you do that. Here's how you open your presentation. And for managers, it's things like, here are your top 3 interviewing questions. Here are your top 10 coaching scenarios. Here's how you handle an individual meeting on the phone, those 5-minute touch calls. Here's what you do over here. And so as a sales manager, if you think about it, we are the least trained group of people in any company, and it's the most important job. Most of us got our job because somebody transitioned up the corporate ladder or out of the company, and there's an empty chair. I didn't go through 6 months of onboarding. I don't think anyone did here on the phone either. I think what happens is they said, you were great at what you did. We'd like you to be a sales manager. And so playbooks for sales managers are just as important as playbooks for salespeople. And so that's really important. So for us, I know I expect my people to look at that playbook and to become the best that they can be in every category. If you were to create a playbook, and I've done this high-tech and low-tech, and high-tech is awesome, but I think it gets lost sometimes. Low-tech seems to be, in my experience over the last 27 years, is more, it's used more. It's more functional for some reason. Now that's changing a little with the millennials, but certainly people love it. And I've actually, for us, we open up it almost looks like a folder, and there's a series of cards, and they just get to lift them up, and it's really kind of cool. And all of the Sandler trainers have them, but you can create them too, because all you have to do is to say, what do I want my people to be great at? What are the categories within my sales process that I wish everybody was great at? And as a sales manager, you do enough coaching calls where you could just create this playbook over time. Because that's the other thing. Sales manager will always say, great idea, but I don't have enough time to get this done. Dave, awesome, but you just cost me about another 70 hours worth of work. Not true. If you agree that a playbook is important and you're capturing the best practices for your company, for your team, then just say, how long is that going to take me to get done? And I picked a year. And you can just either have your team help you, like, hey, that was an awesome response to the objection that we've never heard of you before. So I would get off the phone. I would either type it up or I would use Audio Acrobat, which is just, I get to call a number and I'm talking into the phone. Next thing you know, I've captured the audio link. I've got a written script. So there's a ton of technology out there that will help you do this, but don't do it on your own, because if it's your playbook, everyone will deny that it's great. If you have your team co-create it, it becomes from yours to ours, and they'll love it. And I give people strokes at team meetings for their contribution to the playbook. And once you start giving accolades for things that you want done, more and more people will do it. So it doesn't take that long. You don't have to do it on your own. But I would suggest to you get one so you'll never lose tribal knowledge. And equally as important, your new hires will have the same scripts, the same responses as people who have been there for years. And that is awesome. So let's talk about our next health check or tactic or best practice that I would like you to think about as a sales manager. It's self-sufficiency through rehearsal. Now, rehearsal is a nice phrase, but what does it mean? It's actually role play group. No one likes that word called role play. If you think about it in a sales meeting, if you said, hey, listen, I've got a great topic for today's meeting, we're going to role play. You'd be like chirp, 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 right? Everyone's looking down. Oh, I'm filling out my CRM, boss, don't worry. So no one likes to do it because no one likes to be made a fool of or no one likes to be called out. So, but yet there is a right way to do role play, and role play is one of the most effective tools to change the way people behave. So if you think about it, and I used sports a couple seconds ago for the playbook, but sports actually role plays, don't they? They practice and practice and practice all week long. Doctors practice. At theater, you don't think the first time you watch theater is that's the first time they did it? No way. They've practiced endlessly. And so do pilots. Pilots practice. It's just in the world of sales, for some reason, we don't sit there and role play. We don't practice. We don't do that, and we should. I mean, some of us, the first time we've heard some of the things that we say is the same time that our prospect or customer heard it. And it's important. As sales managers, you know and I know when a rep calls you and says, hey, I'm about to go on a call, what should I do? And you say, oh, awesome. I was about to fill out another, paperwork. I love this part of my job. And you say, do this, 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 and this. And they'll say, okay, got it. And you feel good about yourself as well, right? You hang up the phone, or you could have been live. And you watch it or you hear it later, and not one thing that you said actually happened on that call, even though they said, yep, sounds awesome. Why is that? Well, because under pressure, people revert back to what they're accustomed to doing. And so you need to create new muscle memory because you told them what to do. They said, yeah, I got it. And then they went back to their old muscle memory because people remember 20% of what they hear. They remember 30% of what they see, but they remember 90% of what they themselves say and do. Now think about that for a second. If you believe the premise that salespeople are made and you can shape people, doesn't mean you're going to dramatically change, but you could shape them. And if you believe that people remember what they say and they don't remember everything that you say, and if you're married, you know that's true, right? Everybody remembers what they said, but no one remembers what their spouse says. So it's just fact. It's human nature. So we want them to say it out loud. When you tell them, they're remembering a small percentage. When they get to say it out loud, then they'll do it. And so how do we set up an environment where they actually get to practice? Well, there's a couple steps, so let me explain them to you. Step number one, if you're going to do role play properly, is first of all, just philosophically, you have to be comfortable with doing it. Don't go role playing something that you don't know yourself. So if you're uncomfortable, let's say with a prospecting call, that's not probably your first go-to move for role play. You may want to pick something that you're comfortable with because now your competence as a sales manager is up. So, but step number one is, let's assume for a minute, let me put you in a scenario. I was on a call or I listened to a call and I realized that they did not set an agenda. The salesperson just showed up and threw up all their topic, right? So it wasn't engaging. It wasn't two-way. There was no rhyme or reason to this call. So first step is to explain why an agenda is important so that you can put it into context. But the second thing, and the equally most important thing, is I want you as a sales manager to play salesperson. So what doesn't work is, hey, I noticed you didn't have an agenda. Let me hear that again, or let me see you do that. Well, think about that for a second. George, I noticed you didn't do a good agenda. I'd like you to show me that again. Well, that doesn't work. Obviously, if George knew how to do an agenda, George wouldn't be asked to be doing it again. So he automatically doesn't feel good about it, and he's not going to learn anything from that. But instead, you could say, George, look, one of the things that I've found is having a great agenda in the beginning of the call kind of sets the stage, right? A call that starts well tends to end well. George, let me show you how I would do it. Now you demonstrate, right? You show it to them, because salespeople learn by illustration and imitation. That's why that playbook is so important. So they'll watch you do it. They'll listen for you to do it. They're learning more from watching you than you putting them on the spot to repeat something they didn't know in the first place. And then I love to let them personalize it. So I'll always say, number 3, I'll say this to George. George, our personalities are different. First of all, how do you think the prospect would feel about what I just said? Because I want George to, because if George says to me, the prospect's not going to feel good about that, George is not going to do it himself. But if he says, oh, I think that would go well. All right, first speed bump now passed. The second speed bump for George to own this is for me to say, how would you change it to fit your personality, George? Well, I would say this, this, and this. Okay. And I would actually do it again. But then finally, after I've done it once or twice so he could see it, I've actually changed my talk track a little bit to incorporate the way that he would do it. So now it's his. I would say, George, let's reverse roles for a second. Why don't you feed back now? How would you do that? How would you set up that agenda? Now, George has heard it once or twice. So George now mimics back what he's heard. Is it perfect every time? The answer is no. But I'll help him through coaching to make sure, hey, George, let me do that one more time, right? You know how to do that. But what happens is when George is now probably not with me, he's on his own, he's going to do that first call, George is going to set an agenda because his muscle memory is now changed. Is it going to be perfect every time? It's not. But when you're telling people what to do, that's not coaching. So this is really important. So I guess my question, and let's do a quick poll for a second. Now, how often do you rehearse, do you pre-call, do your stuff with your people? How often do you rehearse with your people? All right, let's see what we got. All right, so hey, monthly, we got it. Quarterly, I got that too. Okay, so that's good. So I would ask yourselves, how often do you role play? And I know that you start to think about when you're debriefing, and I'm going to talk about that in a second because I'm going to give you another tactic to think about. I'd like you to think about how often do you role play. My personal goal is that I'm going to role play with a sales rep at least 3 times a day. Not the same sales rep, but that's my personal goal for what we're doing. All right, let's move. Let's talk about debriefing because we just did that. But I think if you think about debriefing or a call, there's probably 3 stages to a call, right? So you've got 3 stages. Everything that happens before a call, the call itself, and the post-call. So if you think about those 3 stages, right, I've got my pre-call planning, I've got the actual call, I have my post-call activity. And it's just a sidestep for a second. You should have a pre-call planner. You should demand it from your salespeople because I think if people have a pre-call planner, and it shouldn't be a 17-pager, it should be something that takes them less than 20 minutes, their call efficiency will increase. Now let's talk about the debriefing because I'm going to give you something to think about for a second. One is, how often do you have, or do you said you guys debrief often, which is great, but I'd like to offer you a thought or a best practice, which is to create a standardized debriefing set of questions. So because what most sales managers do is that they'll say to a sales rep, how did it go? And the sales rep answers it. And then they'll ask another question, another question, another question. But there's no rhyme or reasons for the questions that the sales manager is asking the rep, right? Because it's going to be reactive, and I get that, and it's real life. That's what sales managers tell me. That's cool. But let me tell you what Dave Sandler did to me when I first showed up to work for him. He said, David, I'll be your sales manager. And I'm not going to be on every call, but the calls that I will be talking to you about, here is the list of questions that I will ask you. I said, what? And I looked at the list. They had 10 questions. And so he goes, I'm going to ask you these questions every time. Now, I could also ask you 50 other questions, but these 10 questions I'm going to ask you every single time. I said, wow, okay. So I looked at the questions, and I said, well, I ask these questions sometimes. I ask these questions all the time. But by printing out the standard list of questions that he was going to ask me every time we talked about an individual opportunity, he shaped my behavior. Because think about what happened. When I went on a sales call and he wasn't there, up popped Dave Sandler to say, you better ask the prospect this question. And I started to shape my calls based on the list of questions that he produced for me. Because if you don't produce the questions, then the salesperson doesn't really get too much benefit, if you think about creating self-sufficiency, from just random questions. So they don't get to learn as much as they have to, and that's really important for us to do. So I need you to think about, right? So we talked about this. I want you to really think about, as we go, is do you have a standard set of debrief questions for your team? Because Sandler handed me one for the first call. He also handed me one for the second call. And then before I could actually do a presentation, then he would give me one and says, look, here are the 5 things that you have to absolutely answer before we can do a presentation. So think about it for a second. That's an important thing. Now, I'm going to jump to a thing on prospecting. So let me talk to you about prospecting plans. Because I asked you how often you debrief, so you guys kind of responded to that already. So I don't want to beat a dead horse on that particular poll because we covered it. But let me give you some more content. Because if you believe that people should be self-sufficient, you believe you should be debriefing, you know you should be creating a playbook, let's talk about the beginning of the funnel for a second. Here's what I'd like you to ask yourselves. Could your team answer how many unique conversations do I need as an individual rep in order to hit my quota? Now, many people would say, of course, my people know that question, but they don't really. I've asked that question a million times. I say, how many unique conversations do you need in order to hit your goal? And they look at you. They know their quota. They probably know how many presentations they need, but they don't know how many unique conversations they need. Because I believe if you need to track your behaviors, I cannot control whether prospects say yes or no, which is at the end of the funnel. I can control how many unique conversations that I have. That could be with unique prospects, or it could be with an existing customer on a unique situation or a different product or service. But that is a key, because once they know that number, then you can start to manage that number. So hypothetically, let's say it's 20, because that's our number at Sandler. I know that I need 20 unique conversations, right? So I need 2 unique conversations per day, face-to-face meetings per day in order to hit your numbers. Now, if you think about that for a second, that's an important thing. That's an important aha moment. So here's how you create what I'm going to call a prospecting plan. There are 3 steps. Your first step in creating a prospecting plan is to come up with what is that number. So how many unique conversations do they need in order to be successful? Step number 2 is to list out where would they come from. So where are my top 5 prospecting sources? Where do they come from? You may say things like, well, LinkedIn, or it could be customer referrals, it could be networking. could be strategic alliances, but come up with your top 5 to 6 prospecting methods. Most organizations can come up with about 20 to 25, but pick your top 5. Right? And again, based on personality, because Dave Mattson, as an example, I'm not going to go to a networking meeting. I'm an introvert. I mean, I'll do it, but it's not on my top 5. Now, here's the thing that's magical, step number 3. If I know it's 20 and I know my top prospecting sources, I want to take my number, which is 20, and I know my top 5, and I want to assign a number to each of my prospecting sources. So hypothetically, I may expect 12 leads from my LinkedIn referral source. I may expect 5 from my customer referrals. I may expect 3 from networking. But you have to actually put a number to each of your lead sources as your goal, because now you can track it. Because if I'm the 15th of the month and my goal was to get 12 LinkedIn leads and I only had 3, now I'm responsible and accountable as an individual rep to go get that number. See, most reps sit around and say, well, where are my leads? Well, listen, how do I get this done? You should put all the pressure on them. So for us, if you create a prospecting plan, they know the number, they know the sources, they know the goal of where they should be getting by source, then you can track. And you'll also figure out where new sources pop up that maybe you didn't even expect that start to hit that number. And that's really important. So prospecting plans, if you can create more top of the funnel activity, the better off you're going to be. So ask yourself, could they answer that question? How many unique conversations do they need in order to hit their number? And do they actually have goals set aside by lead source so they can track that? So let me give you a final one, because I know we're running up against time. Some best practices. It's really attracting and hiring great people. So there's I think most sales managers start off in the interview process, where I think really most of it should happen ahead of the time. So there's some steps here that you see on your screen, but certainly the cost of bringing people on is about 5 times salary. It's really expensive. And so you've got to make sure that you have the right person on your team, because you know that you're judged based on whether your team hits the numbers, and so is everybody else. So let me explain some of these, because some of these boxes you know, because they intuitively make sense. One is the success profile. So what does it take to succeed at that job? So for instance, for a success profile in one of my global accounts people, it's you need to be, you're calling on C-level executives. It's a 3-month selling cycle. It's $1 million plus. So there are certain characteristics that job entails. So I'm not going to go after a transactional salesperson that has a history of a selling cycle of 30 minutes and sells a $50 item. It's just not going to fit. So my job, the characteristics of this job look like this. The second thing is what we call the search model. So the job looks like this. That's my success profile. And then I'm looking for who's my optimal person. My optimal person is really, I'm going to use an acronym called SEARCH. And what that means is what skills, S stands for skills, what skills would this person need in order to be 100% successful at that job? What experience should they have at their previous job in order to be successful at this job? And then I say, okay, well, what attitudes should they have in order to be successful here? What results should they have had at their previous job to be successful here? And C is cognitive skills, and H is habit. So if you can say this is the job characteristics, this is who fits in the job, which is your search model, then the third step is you can create your optimal interview questions. Most sales managers don't have pre-printed interview questions. You really should, because if you know the job profile and you know this search profile, then you don't have to make up your interview questions. And so you're going to be asking good questions about their skills, their experiences, and their results at their previous job. And that's important. Now, you can do assessments, and everyone's got them. And so an onboarding. And by the way, onboarding is important. I would ask you, and I'll give you a quick 2-step process on onboarding, but I think onboarding salespeople is probably one of the most important things that you could do. And so we can offline, and I'll give it to the group. I'll send you a quick steps on how to onboard your salespeople, because I'll ask you a quick poll question if I can, which is most companies don't track the time to hire to the time to profitability. So ask yourself that. The time that you hire somebody, do you track from the time that you hire them to when they're profitable to your company? Like I'll go into an organization, they'll say, well, I think it's about 18 months. I know if you properly hire and onboard, you can bring that down at least by 50%. So let's see what we have. Yeah, so a lot of people don't track that, and you really should, because if you track it, now it'll drive you insane. Because otherwise what you're doing is you're going to be a hostage to the sales cycle. Because otherwise what you do is you hire somebody, and if you have a 6-month selling cycle, you're going to give them a pass for 6 months because you're not tracking it yet. You don't have a good onboarding program. And so that's really important, because then if they don't hit their first 6-month cycle, you're going to let them track to the second 6-month track. And so it's just a vicious cycle. So it's important that you track it so you can get there. So Kristen, I know we covered an awful lot, but those are some of the best practices that I think people could take back immediately if they use those search models, and then, of course, pre-print their interview questions.
Absolutely, Dave. These are some great points. Thank you so much for presenting today. I think it's been really valuable to hear about the necessity of good coaching and planning within a sales organization because, and I love this analogy, it's really not enough to just throw your reps some keys to drive. You really have to be teaching them to drive the car. And teaching's not just throwing out information, but it's providing these tools and the relevant feedback, as you talked about. I really love that point, Dave, on the feedback process and the debriefing and having those specific questions, because it really will help reps think every call they make about what they need to do and receive that specific feedback that they need. So as you can see here in this slide, we have like a little bit of a situation where we have a man working on a conveyor belt, and we're talking about skills and technology. And I do like this because we do need the technology. We need something feeding us leads, feeding us these boxes, as you can see. But without the skills, without the knowledge and the sort of internal process that we gain with either teaching or with sort of tribal knowledge, you don't know what to do with what is being fed to you. So it really is so much a combination of the skills and the technology, or as I like to say, sort of the art of sales with the science of sales. It really is necessary to have both sides of that. So talking about the science of sales, and I'll skip over this slide, the way that our platform works with the science of sales is with something called Neurolytics. Neurolytics is our predictive analytics platform, which is machine learning and sort of gets smarter with each call that's made within your organization. So we have, as you can see there, a really big number, almost 100 billion data points of sales interactions that we've collected over the last 10 years or so, which creates sort of a model telling your reps or prescribing to your reps who should be called and when. Of course, we need to combine with that the skills that we've discussed today. A lot of our job on my strategy team that I work on here at Inside Sales is combining this technology with the necessary skills, or sort of teaching these reps how to drive so that they can really be successful. And of course, technology is great, but utilize that technology to its full benefit. So actually, I think we'll give some information on how to get this recording. So today's webinar will be on demand, but we'll share it over YouTube. We'll have a YouTube link. Is that correct? I think so. And we'll send a link out to all of the attendees today, and we have some free resources available. Do you want to speak to that, Dave?
Sure. For people that want to find out, hey, what's the buying process out there, and what can my people do to become more effective, and why salespeople fail? And I used this term earlier, how to lead the dance between you and the prospect. That's a free book for you to read. But also for those that are not Sandler clients that want to learn a little bit more about Sandler, have at it. Come to one of our training centers. We've got 265 of them. They're in every major metropolitan city anywhere in the world, and pick a topic, whether it's prospecting or selling or sales management or interviewing, and sit in as my guest. No pressure. You'll enjoy it. You'll walk away with a ton of stuff that you can implement immediately, and meet a lot of local entrepreneurs / sales managers in your community.
That's great. I'll have to download that as well. I'm interested to see everything that it says. It's been really great today. So I think we'll just get to the Q&A. I wanted to rush a little bit past my slides toward the end so that we could answer some of your questions. We've had a lot of participants today and a lot of questions. So there's a few questions, especially specifically for you, Dave, regarding what you talked to us about today. And so I think I'll combine two here. One question was, do you find that a script stifles people's creativity to find an even better solution than a script? And so how strictly should it be followed? And then another question going along with that is, how long should a script be? So can you speak a little bit to the scripts, Dave?
Sure. Well, first, I think if you don't have anything, a script is a great starting point. So for me, when I create a playbook as an example, it'll have a sample script in there. So I think it's your job as an individual rep is to personalize the script. And so for a manager, I want to give them, this is an example of excellence, and my scripts will be written, but I also give them an audio file so they could hear somebody doing it. So I think that's equally as important. And then allow them to change it and personalize it. But I think when somebody starts with nothing, you want to give them the script. As far as how long should scripts be, I break mine down to, for me, I like to have people start to remember and memorize and learn scripts at about 2 to 3 minute intervals, and that's it, because it's really hard to learn a 45-minute first call. But if you can learn the key components in these smaller chunks, then you're more apt to remember it. And it never, ever happens in the real world like it does on a script anyways. Never. And that's why you need to make it yours and create your own muscle memory, because regardless of what happens on a real call, whatever comes out, you'll be far better off than if you had nothing. David Sandler used to always say to me, David, you can practice and rehearse all you want to. When you're in front of a prospect or a customer, forget everything and be natural. And that's true, and that's why you need Kristen to create that new muscle memory.
Great answer there. Thank you. We also had a question regarding sales professionals or sales management that isn't really interested in a sales process. So one person said, and this was great, what happens when a sales professionals are not coachable? And that Jessica also talks about a sales manager that she works with that doesn't see a need for a sales process. She says it doesn't really apply to her and what she's selling. So can you speak a little bit to that, sort of convincing the people that you're working with, management, of the necessity of a sales process?
Well, yeah, I think if we're out selling and we don't have a common process, then I'm not sure what direction we're heading. If I look at a pilot, and I fly an awful lot, those people have spent years and years in the military for the most part, but yet they still sit there with a pre-call checklist going through it. They have process. Now, for some sales managers, sometimes the cop-out is, I don't know what a sales process should be, and I don't necessarily know how to start it, so therefore we don't need one. But I think if you're going to coach, you need to coach to a process of some sort. Otherwise, you're coaching on individual scenarios, which don't necessarily increase the productivity of the individual overall. It'll help that situation, but not the overall effectiveness of the person. But I also think that for sales managers, if you've determined, hey, my business just doesn't need one. I don't know who you are yet because I've never run into one, but I'm sure they're out there. But I think then as an individual contributor, you need to figure out what your process is. I wouldn't say, hey, my sales manager or my company doesn't have one, so therefore I don't need one. At the end of the day, you need to be responsible for you and your family. I would say, what are my top producers doing? I'd like to replicate that and call it my sales process. And then as an individual, I will follow this methodology throughout. Now, are there variations? Of course, that's real life. But that doesn't mean that you can't replicate best practices with your own company, and therefore, regardless of what happens, you'll know you're doing the best that you can, and I would bet you'll be in the top echelon of your company.
Excellent. And I would add to that as well for Greg and Jessica. As I've seen lots of different sales cycles, lots of individual reps, and lots of different organizations, and really so much efficiency is lost when people don't have a generalized process. So much time is wasted, and it's difficult maybe to see this if it's yourself, but so much time is wasted on things that we don't need to waste time on, and we won't waste time on if we have a streamlined process. And I'd invite you all to look. So our platform sort of gives a lot of different tools that help streamline that process so that we can sort of plug and chug a little bit more. Of course, every situation is very unique and we have to remain creative, but it's really necessary to have some type of process so that we're being efficient. If you think of like making cookies, if you don't have a recipe and you just sort of throw a different amount of stuff in every time, it will only work out some of the time. So it's important to be consistent. Another question that's come up is, what are the 3 most efficient tools to maintain momentum and high engagement of salespeople on a daily basis? If you want to touch that one first, Dave.
Sure. I'd like a pre-call plan if you can keep the momentum going with pre-call planners. And that's just, you can have 6 to 7 basic questions that will help that. I think debriefing on the back end. And I think the WIMs, the weekly individual meetings that you have with people, to me, what are your behavioral goals? And you said something, which is the recipe. For me, if you want to keep momentum in your team, don't manage results necessarily. And again, I know that's blasphemy, and that we all keep score that way. But create a behavior plan for your team, and that's what you should be actually managing, is what do I need to do every single day to be successful? Because once I have that behavior plan down, or the recipe for success as we'll call it, then you know exactly what to do every single day. May you burn a cookie, using your analogy? You could. You could mess it up, but for the most part, it'll come out. See, I'm a big believer in you manage behavior and not results, because you can't actually determine who's going to say yes and who's going to say no. But if I were to control and become a behaviorist as a manager, then my outcomes will be, more clear and more consistent as I move forward. So those are the things that I would do.
Excellent. That's great. So I think actually we'll just take one more question and just speak to it really quickly so we don't take up too much of your time there on the line. So if you put a question in, you submitted a question and we haven't spoken to it, do feel free to either reach out to Dave or myself via any of the social media. All the information is on the slides. Or we'll also try to write in some responses to the questions that have been asked. So Dave, actually, let's just end with one question. Speaking a little bit to Sandler training, someone asked, what's unique about Sandler training that makes it effective? And if you could speak to that just for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. A couple different things. First of all, I think we are experts in sales management, and leadership. So if you want your salespeople to speak the same language as a sales manager, that's important. A lot of organizations, the sales force, if you're strategic selling or tactical selling, you have 2 different processes, and sales managers do as well. The overarching things that we teach are applicable to each of those roles. I also think when you're going in live, and we can read blogs and we can do a lot of stuff, but our local training centers give people an opportunity to listen and watch and hear other people's issues within the sales process and hear the responses from the trainer. And that's really important because I'm not in it. I mean, you said something earlier on. It's tough to see inefficiencies when they're yours. When I'm watching somebody else do a role play, I learn an awful lot. So Sandler has a very conversational selling model. We have a pull process, not push. I think when you push people through the sales process, they resist. I think when people love to buy but hate to be sold. And so it's a very conversational model. And it really doesn't matter about your personality. Sandler allows you to be very flexible. You don't have to learn scripts and become somebody that you're not. And that doesn't mean I'm not a believer in scripts. It just allows you to have that flexibility. But I think the biggest thing is 2 things. One is that when you're in a training center, you're in front of people who do this for a living. And so I always expect salespeople to say, I'd like to see you make that sales call. I'd like to see you make that phone call. And we will jump right into role, and we will become you in about 3 seconds, and you get to play prospect. And we'll show you how to do what we teach because we eat our own dog food. And then we also have something called the success triangle. If you write a triangle on a piece of paper, we have behaviors, attitudes, and techniques. Sandler's known for awesome techniques. That's what we're known for. But the reason why we have so many fans around the world and the reason it works is not because we have awesome techniques. It's because we also deal with attitudes and behaviors. We teach you how to behave properly and what you need to do every single day to be successful, and that's really important. We also teach you how to think. How can you have equal stature in front of prospects? How can you deal with failure? How do you deal with success? So if you think differently and behave differently and say different things, that's a winning combination. And so I think most organizations just deal with technique training, and that's why when you leave a seminar or you leave a program, you have a spike of productivity for about 30 to 60 days, and everyone goes right back to normal. And that's what we have learned, that doesn't work, and we've overcome that by using those 3 areas every time we teach you something.
That's excellent context, Dave. Thanks so much. So we're a couple minutes over the hour. I think we'll just end it out here. Again, thanks everyone for joining us live today, and a special thanks to Dave for all of the input that he's given us, all of the great information. And we would encourage you all to connect with us on social media if you have any questions. Certainly download that ebook and check out InsideSales.com. Thanks everyone, and have a great afternoon.